Genesis chapter 21. Chapter 21. Now, we were a little low on the ground last week, and our conversation went to different places. So, we're gonna recap. Let's look at Genesis chapter 21, and follow along with me. We'll read the first few verses here. Chapter 21, starting in verse 1. It says, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. All right, so 2 weeks ago we talked about this. What's some of the things that's going on in this section here? What's really the biggest?
Fulfillment of promise.
Yeah, there's fulfillment of promise. God said, you're going to have a child. It's going to be through Sarah. And finally, here comes the promise. How many years has it been since God initially gave Abraham the promise that he was going to have many children, he was going to have nations come out of his womb, out of his line and all of that? How many years has it been? Anybody remember? 25 years. 25 years. Can you understand a little bit of how Abraham and Sarah felt over maybe 5 years after God had promised something, 10 years, and still no fulfillment? Can you kind of understand a little bit about why they would be maybe jumping the gun or be anxious or waver in their faith a bit or try, maybe we got to help God out or something? It's been 25 years. And we're not saying that it's right what they did, but can you kind of understand, looking at it, he was given this promise when he was 75, it's only now fulfilled when he's 100. It's been 25 years. Everybody kind of, again, we're not saying that it's okay, but
it's the same as us.
Yeah.
We're impatient. We want things now.
That's right.
We don't want to wait until 25 years.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean, if it's more than a day or two, a week or two, I mean, at a certain point we start to get anxious.
I was going to say, even after she bore the child, she's still speaking as if she doesn't believe it happened.
Yeah.
With all the things they've seen God do,
yeah,
she's still going, I can't believe it. Everybody's just going to laugh with me about this.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, though, it's kind of like that. And, of course, she's the one who's pregnant. So she's had 9 months of, I mean, I don't know, at what point do you kind of know as a woman, those of you who had children, at what point do you kind of know, you can kind of see it and stuff? How many weeks or?
Depends on which child it is.
Depends?
No, for real, I mean.
When can you know?
My first child, you couldn't tell I was pregnant until like 5 months.
Okay.
Second child, like 2 months.
Okay. All right. So probably no more than 5 months, right? So she's had 5 months, 6 months. She's had a bunch of months where she physically knows that she's pregnant, but yet and still at the very end here, it's still this kind of joyous, wow, this is amazing. This is amazing that this has actually happened. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, there at the very beginning, people were living 700, 900 years. Obviously, God cut that lifespan down. So it keeps referring in his old age. So about now, what's normal for people to have children? Like 100-year-olds having children, is that still common at this time right now?
Yeah, we talked about this. Abraham was born to his father in his hundreds. So this is a transition period of time where there are still some people who are living hundreds of years, and yet there's others who are dying quickly. So there has to be some, it's kind of relative depending on the person and all that.
In his old age.
So he's still, clearly he's old in some sense, right? There are people who are dying in their 80s and 90s and, hundreds and 20s and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it's a transition period. So she's at least seeing this is old age or the beginning of old age at this point. How long people are living, you've got one of Noah's sons who's living, well into this period of time. So it's a transition period because the flood was when the lifespan started to decrease. But yeah, you still have some people living, 100 and 200 and all that. But yeah, this is the period of time where it's starting to wane down. So yeah, it is an odd thing, but he's considered old, clearly. She says he's old, we're old, all of that. But yeah, you bring up an interesting point because Abraham is going to continue to have children in the future. I mean, he's going to continue to get older and older, and he's still going to have children. So, and that goes to show that the problem, again, was never with him. The problem was with her. She was unable to have children. But yeah, it's a weird period of time. So he's considered old, but yet there's other people who are living even further into their old age.
Wasn't his birth miraculous? Like even
Isaac?
Joseph's birth? Yeah.
Isaac's birth was miraculous, yeah, because Sarah was unable to have children. I mean, they've been in the promised land, never mind married, but they've been in the land for 25 years, and she's been unable to conceive. So clearly there was something physically wrong with Sarah, who she couldn't have children, and God miraculously works so that she can. He fixes the situation. So it's definitely miraculous. Absolutely. It's a miraculous event. And she's kind of, and you could get into her shoes and understand. It doesn't matter. If you were promised something and it took 25 years for it to finally happen, you'd probably be in a little bit of shock when it finally happens as well. It's like, I thought the day would never come, but here it is. It's finally come. That can happen with women who are pregnant, right? After a certain period of time, you're like, when will this end? At first you're loving it, and then as it goes on, at least some of the women I know who have been pregnant, at the end they're like, it's time for this baby to come. And sometimes they feel like it's never going to come, like this child's never. And then finally the child comes. So a disbelief or an amazement or all of that's going on here, absolutely. What do we learn about God in this section?
He does what he says he's going to do.
Keeps his promises. Keeps his promises. He does what he says he's going to do. And that was a big thing that we kind of hammered home as well. You remember that? We talked about promises. God will always be faithful to his promise. He's not going to lie. He will keep his promises.
I also think that it shows that everything's on God's time. That's something we have to remember today.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's different than God's promises are not necessarily the same as us asking God for things. God may or may not give us what we ask for, and there's those kind of aspects, but his promises, they're always gonna be fulfilled, but they're not gonna be at our time, as you pointed out. It's gonna be at his time, when it's the right time. Jesus came a couple thousand years after the first promise of this seed who was going to come to save the world. It was a couple thousand years. But it was at the right time, the scriptures say. At the right time. It was a perfect timing. So God's timing is always perfect, but it's not always our timing. We want things quicker than God is, than his timing a lot of times. And again, Abraham and Sarah, they wanted it quicker than it was, God's timing.
Isn't there a verse where man is saying things are now as they've always been?
Yeah, Peter, I believe it's in the letters of Peter, might be 2 Peter. The people are saying, where is the promise of his coming and all of that, and things have constantly been going the same way, as they have been in the past. And Peter says, You know, God is not slow as you count slowness. He's patient, not desiring that any would perish, but all would come to repentance. So God, a lot of times, is patient, much more patient than we are. Long suffering is the word that's often used. And you get the word suffering in there, right? Long suffering. I don't like suffering, period. I don't want it to be little suffering. I don't want it to be short suffering. Never mind long suffering. But yet God is long suffering. He's patient with us and with others.
When I ask for something, I want it yesterday.
That's right. I don't know that you're alone with that. We all want it on our timing, but God's timing is the best timing. God's timing is perfect. And we talked about the woman who had the issue of blood, and she was sick for 12 years. Now, it's not 25 years, it's 12 years. But she's not only is she waiting for, she's not waiting for a child. She's sick. She's in pain and she's suffering. And you've got to believe, I've got to believe, that she cried out to the Lord and said, bring some relief. And God waited 12 years. Now, his time was perfect. But she might not have felt like it was perfect suffering for 12 years, right? She might not have thought, God's going to be glorified. I just have to suffer for 12 years. So yeah, it's God's timing, not our timing. And sometimes we may have to suffer through that, but God is going to bring about good in the midst of all of this. So he's patient, long-suffering. Go ahead, Steve.
The only thing I think you also pointed out at one point is not only does he fulfill his promises, but he fulfills his promises no matter how we've acted in the interim, if we keep coming back to him. Because Abraham, he keeps going astray and making all kinds of mistakes, but he keeps coming back to God, and so he maintains his promise.
Yeah, God's promise especially to Abraham, is an unconditional promise.
Right.
He is going to bless Abraham regardless of what happens. He didn't say, Abraham, as long as you behave yourself, I'll bless you. He didn't. Otherwise, he wouldn't be blessing him, right? For other covenants, see, he's in a covenant with Abraham, but for other covenants, we talked a lot about Israel. Israel has a covenant with God, and it's a covenant of blessing and cursing. God says, if you do this, see, there's conditions upon that covenant. If you follow me, I'll bless you. If you don't, I will curse you. The land will spit you out. Now, with us, it's the same thing. There's conditions upon the covenant that we're in. Conditions of, we need to be faithful. We need to repent if we have sinned. But the promise is, if we do sin and we do repent, what happens?
He forgives us.
He forgives. That's good. He is faithful to that promise. So that's good news. That's good news for us. But yeah, so some covenants are conditional, some are unconditional. Abraham's unconditional, but regardless, God will always be faithful to his promise. Go ahead. And his covenant.
This is about like the time we got. Well, I don't know if anybody's ever seen that Descendants movie, Disney movie, but Carlos died on it. I know I just saw that last night, and bawling her eyes out at the table and asking why would God take him? He's only 20 years old. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? How
Yeah.
would you explain that to him? I said he's in a better place. Everything happens for a reason. She's been really upset and shut up about this. Like, she doesn't understand how somebody's young and such a good person. He gave to the world. He did. He took the benefits.
Yeah.
So,
We live in a broken world. At the end of the day, we live in a broken world. Death is a result of sin and disobedience. And it's one of the consequences that happened when Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden. We suffer, we are not guilty of their sin, but we suffer consequences of their mistakes, just like a child who is born to a mother who has been on drugs is born addicted to drugs, right? That child is not guilty of that crime, that sin, but they suffer the consequences. So just in a general sense, we all suffer the consequence of the fall, but of course, we contribute to it as well, right? So we're guilty of our own sins and all of that kind of stuff. And that man who died was guilty of sin as well. I don't know where he was spiritually with God or anything, but at the end of the day, death is, we live in a broken world. Our bodies break down, It's not the way it was meant to be, but God is going to. Now, for a child, I would say God is going to fix all this.
That's right.
He's going to fix it. And one day, God is going to restore all things. So that's good. But, yeah, that's tough to kind of deal with a child on those subjects. But, yeah, God's timing. God is faithful to his promises. And that's another promise. God had made the promise that one day there'll be a restoration. One day, all of this will be changed, transformed, all of that kind of stuff. So that's good. We know that he's faithful to his promises, so we can count on that in the future. The resurrection and all of that. That's good news for us.
Whether we live or not. And then
Well, it doesn't matter whether we live or die. You know, the promise of resurrection and glory and all of that is there. Absolutely. Okay. Just a quick note. Ishmael, when Isaac is born, is probably somewhere around 13, 14, something like that. 12. And then let's look, if nobody has anything else to say on that, we'll continue on in 8. All right. Let's read 8 through 21. Anybody want to read that?
The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham had a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance of my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly, because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt.
All right. So what's going on in verses 8 and 9 in this section?
Sarah was jealous of Hagar and Ishmael. She didn't like the way he was treating her and her son.
Okay, what's going on in verse 8? Because that's true. What's in verse 8?
Celebrating Isaac's.
There's a celebration. There's a celebration. Isaac is weaned. What does it mean to be weaned?
you're old enough to eat by yourself.
Yeah. Now, what's that? Sort of old enough to eat by yourself. No longer breastfeeding, right, at this time. Today it might be no longer bottle feeding. Now, today, what's kind of the average age for a child to go from a bottle or something? 1 year old. In the ancient world, it was more like, could be anywhere between 2 and 4 years old. So you could have a 4-year-old by your side, Mom. You know?
I think some old countries are still that way.
They're still that way, yeah. I think there's a lady up north whose child was 4 or 5 when he was finally weaned. But yeah, in the ancient world, so he's probably somewhere around 3 or 4, which means Ishmael is somewhere around 16 years old. So keep that in mind. Ishmael is 16, 17, he's something like that. And this is anywhere between a 2 and a 4-year-old that's here. So Isaac is weaned. There's a celebration. And what is Ishmael doing?
Making fun of Isaac.
Making fun of him, laughing at him, right? Making fun of Isaac. And verse 8, Sarah sees what's going on, and she's angry, right? Because there's a mocking laughter that goes on. And so this should remind you of something, or I'm hoping you'll be reminded of something. Have we read anywhere in the book of Genesis about two brothers? One maybe jealous of another. Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel. Now Ishmael does not kill Isaac. But what had Ishmael probably thought growing up?
He was going to be the head dude.
Yeah. Not only is he the firstborn, he is the first, literally he's the first one born, not from Sarah, but he's the first one born to Abraham, right? So he's the firstborn. Now in that culture, the firstborn, the first physically born, was meant to receive the inheritance, the double portion, all of these kind of things. And again, Abraham and Sarah, during this period of time, most of this period of time, up till probably the last year, didn't think God was going to fulfill his promise, did they? They don't act that way anyways, right? Throughout this period of time. They question, they doubt. They just don't think so. So Ishmael may very well have been, and probably was, raised to think that he was going to get the inheritance. So here comes this child along, and this is a 16, 17-year-old young man who's laughing mockingly at, and probably is very jealous and angry with this boy. So you see that there's often, you're going to see this a number of times, often there's sibling rivalry going on. And typically it's between an older and a younger brother. You see it with Jacob and Esau. You see it with Cain and Abel. You see it here, just briefly, but you see it here. You will see it in the life of Christ.
But it also upset Sarah.
Yes.
The one that made demands.
She's upset. She's upset. But think about the themes that are going on here. Just keep this in mind, this idea of brother versus brother and sibling rivalries. Jesus comes on the scene later on, and it's his own family members, the Jewish nation, who crucify him, right? Kill him. So there's this family kind of rivalry that's going on. And all the while, you've got to remember that Satan has been given some truth back in Genesis 3:15. Anybody remember what went on in Genesis 3:15?
He's going to nip at your heel, and you're going to...
That's right. That's right. And that's Satan in the form of a serpent, right? So God preaches the gospel for the first time in Genesis 3:15, and he says to Satan, you're going to strike his heel, but he is going to crush your head. We know, again, later on, the New Testament tells us this is Christ, and Christ is going to destroy the serpent. So Satan is, we've got to believe he's thinking, how can I get this to change, maybe, because Satan's not omniscient. And so you can see it with Cain and Abel. God said, sin is crouching at your door, you must master it. He didn't master it. You know, that's Satan's loving that, you know. Maybe he's killed the boy, you know. Abel could be that promised child. But along comes Seth. God brings about Seth, and there's a new line. So anyways, there's this rivalry that's going on, and we'll see it all the way through into the New Testament. So something to think about there. What does this section show us about the family unit of Abraham and his wives and his children? What's it tell us about the family?
Still live together. They're all living in the same area, mostly.
Is there peace?
No, they're dysfunctional.
No shalom, right? No peace in the home. Go ahead, Mike.
God has fulfilled his promise to Abraham. It didn't say how many people or how many wives or concubine or whatever he was going to have the children with. The promise was to Abraham that he would make him a great nation.
That's true. Later on, it is specific that it's going to be through Sarah that you'll have the offspring. But the family unit is dysfunctional at this point.
Shows that when mama's happy, nobody's happy.
Mom's not happy, nobody's happy. Yeah. And the problem is, there's two mamas. You got two moms with two kids. So there's no peace, there's no harmony. Why is there no peace? Why is there no harmony within the family?
Jealousy.
What's the root cause of the jealousy? Why is there jealousy?
Well, in verse 13 it says, I will make a nation of the son of the bondwoman also, because he is your offspring.
Yeah, he's gonna.
There's another fight issue.
He's gonna bless him as well, and that'll be issues later on.
Well, it was because are you talking about because they were trying to help God out?
Yeah, it all goes back to helping God out, doesn't it? Why is there no peace in the family of Abraham?
They created it.
They did it themselves. They thought, I'm going to help God out. He's in a tough jam. Let's fix this, right? And they really did fix it. They fixed it for good, right? They broke it. They broke it. The lesson for us should be careful that you don't try to help God out, right? Don't try to help God out. When we try to help God out, we often end up making things far worse on ourselves. It's much better to trust and obey. It's much better to be patient. It's much better to wait on God. Be still and know. And we have a hard time being still, don't we? Again, we can see ourselves in Abraham. We can see ourselves in Sarah. We understand it's been 25 years. But the lesson's written for us. It's recorded for our understanding, right? It wasn't for Abraham and Sarah that these stories are recorded. It's for us, right? That we might learn something. How many parents have said to their children as they were growing up, I've been there, I've done that, don't do it, right? Learn from my mistake. You ever done something like that? Yeah, I've said it. And people said it to me when I was growing up. And you know what I did? Didn't, yeah, right. I'm like, that's because you're stupid. I know, didn't work for you, but I know better, right? And then, right? And then at the end of it going, they told me this was going to happen, right? So the scriptures a lot of times is there. We have these stories that we look at and we get frustrated, or we think, wow, Abraham's such a fool, or how come he didn't learn? He lied twice, did the same thing, all of that. And that really reflects on us. We ought to be learning from it, but we can see ourselves in these stories a lot of times. But the point for us is be patient. Wait on God. Wait on his timing. Try not to help him out. Because when we do, we mess things up. They mess things up. The only reason that there's conflict in the family, at least as we're seeing it play out here, is because Abraham and Sarah did not believe and wait on the Lord. They rushed ahead. That's difficult, but they rushed ahead, and we often want to do the same things. Does God need our help? I think he can get it done, right? He doesn't need our help.
He doesn't have things he wants us to do.
That's different. That's different than waiting on God. If God says, I want you to be patient, I want you to wait on me, that's different. That doesn't mean that God does not require us to do certain things. That's a different subject. But yes, be faithful, all of those kind of things. And part of being faithful is trust and believe that I'm going to get it done. All right, verses 15 through 21, the text that was read for us there. What's going on in this section here? Sarah says, get these guys out of here.
Get rid of that woman.
Abraham is reluctant, because that's his child, and his other wife, or a long time now. And so he's reluctant. He doesn't want to do it. God comes to him and says, it's all right. Do what Sarah wants. Now, she has the wrong motives. But what is the reasoning, I guess before we get there, what is the reasoning, before we get to verse 15, that God gives that Abraham should relent to Sarah and let the woman and the child Ishmael go?
Because the promise is through him.
Because the promise is through Isaac, and if this doesn't separate, there's going to be probably a whole lot more problems, right? Who knows if Ishmael wouldn't try to
Kill him.
Cain and Abel, right? Might try to do it. So God says, no, that's all right. Let them go. I'm going to take care of it. So what's going on in 15 through 21?
Well, now we hear from her. She's without water and food,
Yeah.
and she separates herself from the son, and she's wondering what on earth she's going to do.
He's giving up.
She's given up. Yeah. I mean, she's at the end of her ropes. Food, water, the supplies, they've all dried up. They're all gone. They're all gone. Now again, Ishmael is approximately how old? 16, 17, something like this. So he's not a little boy, but still. It doesn't matter how old your child gets. Yeah, it's still your child, right? You could have a 40, 50-year-old child, and you see your child suffering, you know. So she doesn't want to watch the child, Ishmael, die. So she kind of moves away. What happens after that? What goes on then? So they're in danger. Hagar and Ishmael are in danger of dying.
God helps her.
God gets involved. God gets involved. He's going to get involved, and what does he do? Yeah. And there's water that's provided, right? It says, looked up and saw. It's not that she was blind, and God says, now you can see. It's this concept of God was leading her to where there's water, right? She looked up. It's that concept of she's following God, and God is leading her to the place where there's water. So God is delivering the child from danger, delivering the mother from death, delivering. So this teaches us again, and we see this throughout. Everybody should recognize this. This is the concept of who our God is. Our God is a deliverer. Our God is a rescuer, one who delivers and rescues. And we see it here again. He's going to deliver, he's going to rescue, and he's going to keep his promise. Right? He had made a promise. Ishmael's going to be blessed. Because remember, Abraham says to God, because God comes to Abraham and says, you're going to have a child through Sarah. And he doesn't believe. He's like, just let your blessing be on Ishmael. And God says to him, I'll bless the child. He'll be blessed. But it's not through him that the promise is going to come. It's going to be through Isaac, which Sarah is going to bear to you. But God had promised, Ishmael will be blessed. I will bless him. I'll take care of him because he's your offspring. So again, we're seeing the fulfillment of God's promise. God is going to protect. Now, did it look bad?
For who?
For Hagar and Ishmael. Did it look bad?
Conflict.
Well, here when they're out in the wilderness, it looks bad. It looks like they're going to die. Does it ever look bad in your life? Does it ever look like things are bad? How could I get out of this? How could God rescue me from this? Did it look bad when Jesus was being crucified?
Yeah.
It often looks bad, doesn't it? But God gets involved. And God takes care of it. And so again, here we see that concept. We should never give up our faith and our trust and our hope in God, even if it looks bad. Even if it looks dark. Even if it looks like we're being crucified. Even if it looks like we're going to be dying of thirst, right? You've got the thirst and all of that here. God will get us through it. One way or the other. God will get us through it. So,
I had an example.
okay, go ahead.
My son came back from Vietnam either 180 or 190% disabled. He lived 30 some odd years in that shape.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
He went to college, got a degree, that no one would give him a job. He could have ranted and raved, but not one time did I ever hear him rant or rave. I often heard him in his bedroom praying,
Yeah.
but I didn't give up and he didn't give up.
Yeah. Yeah. God will get us through. God will get us through. But the point is, it can look bad. It can look bad. It looked bad for Hagar and Sarah. It looked bad for Jesus on the cross. It looks bad at times, but God is able to get us through. Anybody got the last word? Go ahead.
Question. So maybe this sounds silly, but I know Jesus isn't here at this time on earth to do miracles and stuff, but is God like doing miracles at this time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yes and no. Yes and no. Sarah being given a child, that's miraculous.
Okay. And in my eyes, I see that.
Yes.
But like a physical. So when I you say he saves them as in leading them to water, it's not like he magically appears a well. Like, not magically, but
No, miraculously, the well doesn't miraculously appear. He leads them to where there is.
So it's not like a
well.
miracle like that.
No, it's not a miracle like that. And I mean, you bring up a great point. There are miracles that are going on, but if you look at the biblical timeline, if you look at the biblical history, most of God's people, most of the time, lived in a non-miraculous period. Even a lot of Abraham's life was non-miraculous. There's a couple events that happen, but a lot of times they're doing the dishes. They're doing the laundry, right? I mean, it's just day-to-day kind of activities. And even when God delivers, like here, again, it almost sounds like she looked up and she was blind and she saw. That's not really what's going on. It's the concept of God was leading her to where she could find some water. So there's some of those kind of things.
Like he restored her faith as in opened her eyes.
God opened her eyes.
Yeah, it says God opened her eyes and she saw. Yeah, but it's not I don't think that's a miraculous kind of thing, like there was a well right there and she couldn't see it and then God said, okay, now you can see it kind of thing. But yes, there are periods where you'll see these great events of miracles and such, but a lot of times God is rescuing and delivering people through very normal, mundane ways. It's not always miraculous.
Spiritually.
You could say spiritually, there's some, God is doing something spiritually, like on the cross. I mean, when God does what he does on the cross, it looks like just a regular execution. It's not like angels are coming down from heaven and wiping people out or anything it's just, there's some events that kind of happen with the weather and darkness and stuff, but it's not like he glows up on the cross or anything like that. It was an exexecution, just a kind of an average crucifixion,
Well, it's like
for the
he was
people
a human
around.
being.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was both, yeah. So, yeah, absolutely.
God still does things that we consider miracles, but there is not. I don't have the power to say, God, do this.
Yeah.
God, do this.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're talking about even that concept, but yeah. The issue of miracles and all of that. Listen, God can do whatever he wants to do, even today. And he'll do it. And I'll let him be God. And I'll be okay with that.
James,
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you.
That's all right. You're going to have the last word, and then we're going to close in prayer. So go ahead.
Okay. Chapter 15 through 17. And the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. Then she went and sat down across from him, a distance of a bow shot. For she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. So she sat opposite him and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad.
Yes.
Hagar, but of the lad.
Yes.
Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is.
Yeah, she heard the
Hagar was
song.
the one who was weeping.
They were both weeping, or they were both crying in some form or fashion. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they both, absolutely. And God heard both, really. Right, comes to her, he speaks to her, he doesn't speak to the child, but yeah.
Well, God has plans for the young man as well as
He does.
the mother.
Well, we don't know what the plans are for the mother, but we definitely know he's got plans for the boy. He's going to take care of him.
Well, if
take care of
you
him.
take care of that boy like God has intended, the mother's going to be blessed.
Yeah, we don't know what that's going to entail, but yeah. All right, let's close in prayer.